the most important 30 seconds of her life. At 45, she had built Davis Tech Solutions from a basement startup into a $50 million empire, but tonight she felt smaller than she had in years. "Ma'am, please don't talk." The voice was tiny, urgent, and came from somewhere near her knees. Simone's heart stopped as she looked down to see a little black girl, no more than 8 years old, pressed against the elevator's back corner. The child's dark eyes were wide with terror, and her small hands trembled as she held a finger to her lips. "Honey, what are you?" Simone began, but the girl shook her head frantically. "They'll hear you," the child whispered, so quietly Simone had to strain to listen. "Daddy says the bad man thinks nobody knows, but I know. I heard everything." The elevator continued its slow ascent to the 20th floor, each second stretching like an eternity. Simone's mind raced. This was her building, her company, and she had never seen this child before. How had she gotten in? Why was she hiding? And what did she mean about the bad man? The little girl's breathing was shallow, panicked. She wore a faded purple dress that had seen better days, and her hair was pulled back in neat braids adorned with colorful beads that clicked softly when she moved. Despite her fear, there was something determined in her expression, a strength that reminded Simone of herself at that age. "My name is Grace," the girl whispered, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "And I think my daddy's gonna get hurt because of what I saw." The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 15th floor. Grace flinched at the sound, pressing herself further into the corner. Simone felt something crack open in her chest, a fierce protectiveness she hadn't experienced since she was young and watching her own mother work 3 jobs to keep them afloat. "Grace," Simone whispered back, crouching down to the child's level. "I'm Simone. This is my building and I promise you're safe with me. But I need you to tell me what's wrong." The child's eyes searched Simone's face, as if trying to determine whether she could be trusted. Finally, Grace reached into her small backpack and pulled out a cell phone, an old model that looked like it had been discarded and refurbished. "I recorded them," Grace whispered. "The bad man and another man. They were talking about taking money and hurting people who might tell. They said they'd make my daddy disappear if anyone found out he cleans their offices at night." Simone's blood ran cold. She thought about Robert Sterling, her CFO, who had been acting strangely for months. Late-night meetings, private phone calls, and unexplained transfers that he claimed were routine business expenses. She had trusted him, relied on his expertise as her company grew. The possibility that he might be stealing from her, from the employees whose livelihoods depended on Davis Tech, made her stomach turn. "Grace, where is your daddy right now?" Simone asked. "Cleaning the big office on 20. The one with all the windows." Grace's voice broke. "He doesn't know I followed him to work tonight. Mama's working her night shift at the hospital, and I got scared staying home alone. I've been hiding in the supply closet, but then I heard the bad man coming back, so I ran to the elevator." The numbers above the door continued to climb. 16, 17, 18. With each floor, Simone felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her company anymore. This was about a little girl who had witnessed something that could put her family in danger, and a father who was unknowingly caught in the middle of a conspiracy. "Grace, I need you to stay very quiet and very brave for me, okay?" Simone said, pulling out her own phone. "I'm going to make sure your daddy is safe and I'm going to stop the bad man. But first, I need to see what you recorded." With shaking hands, Grace handed over the phone. The screen was cracked, but the video was clear enough. Simone pressed play and watched in horror as Robert Sterling's voice filled her ears through the tiny speaker. "The audit's next week. We need to clean this up fast," Robert was saying to someone off camera. "If that janitor says anything about seeing us move those files, we'll have to take care of him. Same with anyone else who might have noticed the discrepancies." Another voice, one Simone didn't recognize, responded, "What about the girl? Kid's always hanging around after school. Smart as a whip. If she overheard anything." "Kids don't understand business," Robert's voice came back, cold and calculating. "But if she becomes a problem, accidents happen. Buildings can be dangerous places at night." The video ended abruptly, but the threat hung in the air like poison. Simone felt rage and determination surge through her veins. She had worked too hard and overcome too much to let someone destroy what she had built. More importantly, she would not let anyone threaten this brave little girl or her father. The elevator chimed as it reached the 20th floor. Through the glass doors, Simone could see the lights of her corner office, where she had spent countless hours building her dream. Tonight, that dream was under attack, but she wasn't the same scared young woman who had started with nothing 20 years ago. "Grace," she whispered as the doors began to open. "Stay behind me." We're going to find your daddy, and then we're going to make sure the bad man never hurts anyone again." As they stepped into the darkened hallway, Simone could hear voices coming from her office. Robert's voice, angry and impatient, and another man's voice, deeper and more menacing. Grace's small hand slipped into hers, trusting and warm, and Simone felt the full weight of what the next few hours would demand of her. The little girl who had stumbled into her elevator had just handed her the key to saving her company. Now Simone had to find the courage to use it, before it was too late for all of them. The 20th floor of Davis Tech Solutions felt different in the darkness. What had been Simone's sanctuary during daylight hours now seemed filled with shadows and secrets. She moved carefully down the hallway, Grace's small hand still gripping hers, both of them stepping as quietly as possible on the polished marble floors. "That's my daddy," Grace whispered, pointing toward a supply cart positioned outside the accounting department. Leon Thompson emerged from an office, a tall, lean man in his early 40s wearing the navy blue uniform of the building's cleaning service. His movements were efficient but cautious, and Simone could see the wariness in his posture even from a distance. Leon had worked in her building for 3 years, but Simone realized with shame that she had never really seen him. He was one of the invisible people who kept her world running, arriving after she left, gone before she returned. Tonight, watching him work with quiet dignity while his life was potentially in danger, she felt the sting of her own unconscious neglect. "Daddy?" Grace started to call out, but Simone quickly put a gentle hand over her mouth. "We have to be smart about this," Simone whispered. "If the bad men know you're here, they might hurt all of us." From her corner office came the sound of raised voices. Robert Sterling was clearly agitated, his usually smooth executive tone replaced by something harsh and desperate. "I don't care how you handle it," Robert was saying. "The money needs to be moved tonight, and anyone who might have seen something needs to be dealt with. I've worked too hard to let some night janitor destroy everything." Simone felt Grace tense beside her. The child's father was still unaware of the danger, methodically cleaning offices while men plotted his destruction just yards away. The injustice of it, a hard-working father threatened by powerful men who saw him as disposable, ignited something fierce in Simone's chest. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed a text message to Destiny Thompson, her head of security. Destiny was the one person in the company Simone trusted completely, a former police detective who had joined Davis Tech after a corruption scandal in her old department left her disillusioned with traditional law enforcement. If anyone could help navigate this dangerous situation, it was Destiny. "Emergency. 20th floor. Bring backup but stay quiet. Lives in danger." Destiny's response came back immediately. "On my way. 5 minutes." Leon was getting closer, his cart squeaking softly as he moved from office to office. Simone knew they had to warn him before he unknowingly walked into Robert's view. She motioned for Grace to stay hidden behind a pillar, then stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Thompson," she called softly. Leon looked up, startled to see the company's CEO on the floor at this hour. He straightened immediately, concern crossing his features. "Miss Davis? Is everything all right? I wasn't expecting anyone to be here this late." "Leon, I need you to listen very carefully," Simone said, moving closer but keeping her voice low. "Your daughter is here and she's safe, but there are people in my office who mean to harm you. We need to get both of you out of here quietly." Leon's eyes widened. "Grace? She's supposed to be at home. How did she—" He stopped, the implications hitting him. "Ma'am, I don't understand. Why would anyone want to hurt me? I just clean offices." "Because you clean the right offices at the right time," Simone said grimly. "Grace recorded a conversation between my CFO and another man. They're stealing money from the company, and they think you might have seen something that could expose them." Leon's face hardened with understanding and fear. "I did see something. Last week, Mr. Sterling and some other man I didn't recognize were moving boxes of files out of the accounting office after midnight. I didn't think much of it, figured it was legitimate business. But Grace..." His voice broke slightly. "Where is she? Daddy?" Grace had abandoned her hiding spot and was running toward her father. Leon swept her up in his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. In that moment, Simone saw the fierce love between them, a bond that reminded her of her own relationship with her mother, who had sacrificed everything to give Simone opportunities. "Baby girl, what are you doing here?" Leon asked, his voice mixing relief and worry. "I was scared at home, so I followed you. But then I heard the bad man talking about hurting people and I recorded it on the phone you fixed for me," Grace explained quickly. "Miss Simone says she's going to help us." Leon looked at Simone with a mixture of gratitude and skepticism. In his world, wealthy executives weren't typically allies of working-class families. The system had taught him to be cautious, to expect disappointment from those in power. "Mr. Thompson, I know you have no reason to trust me," Simone said. "But I built this company to be different. To be a place where everyone matters, where everyone is protected. I failed you by not seeing what was happening, but I won't fail you now." Before Leon could respond, the voices from Simone's office grew louder. Robert Sterling was on the phone, and his words carried clearly down the hallway. "I don't care what it costs. Find the janitor and his kid. If they disappear tonight, all our problems go away. Make it look like an accident, a gas leak, a break-in, whatever. Just handle it." Grace whimpered and buried her face against her father's shoulder. Leon's jaw tightened with rage and determination. Simone felt her own anger crystallize into cold, calculated fury. These men weren't just stealing money, they were threatening a child, a father, everything she believed her company stood for. The elevator dinged softly, and Destiny Thompson stepped into the hallway. At 35, Destiny moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down dangerous situations and emerged stronger. She was tall and athletic, with intelligent eyes that immediately assessed the scene. "Situation report," Destiny said quietly, approaching the group. "Robert Sterling is embezzling funds and planning to eliminate witnesses," Simone said. "This is Leon Thompson and his daughter Grace. Grace has evidence and they're both in immediate danger." Destiny nodded. "All business. How many hostiles?" "At least 2, possibly more. They're in my office now, planning something for tonight." "Okay." Destiny pulled out her phone. "I'm calling SWAT and getting federal agents here. Financial crimes involving threats to life is FBI territory. But first, we need to get you 3 to safety." From the office came the sound of footsteps. Robert's voice was getting closer to the door. "They're coming out," Grace whispered, terror in her voice. Destiny immediately took charge. "Service elevator now. Mr. Thompson, carry your daughter. Ms. Davis, stay between them and any threats. Move." They hurried toward the service elevator at the far end of the hall, Leon holding Grace protectively while Simone and Destiny flanked them. As they reached the elevator, Simone heard her office door open behind them. "Check the whole floor," Robert was saying. "If they're here, find them." The service elevator doors closed just as footsteps began moving in their direction. As they descended, Simone looked at Grace, who was still clinging to her father but watching her with those wise, trusting eyes. "What happens now?" Leon asked. "Now we make sure the truth comes out," Simone said. "And we make sure your daughter's courage changes everything." But even as she spoke, Simone knew the real battle was just beginning. Robert Sterling had resources, connections, and years of experience covering his tracks. Taking him down would require more than just Grace's recording. It would require Simone to risk everything she had built. Looking at this brave little girl and her hard-working father, she realized she had no choice. Some things were worth more than money or business success. Some things were worth everything. The basement security office of Davis Tech Solutions had never felt so much like a war room. Destiny had transformed the space into a command center, with multiple screens showing security feeds from throughout the building, phones connected to law enforcement agencies, and Grace's cracked phone hooked up to a digital recording system that would preserve the evidence in multiple formats. Leon sat in a corner with Grace on his lap, both of them looking overwhelmed by the sudden attention from federal agents, police detectives, and corporate security personnel. Simone watched them, remembering her own childhood, the feeling of being small and powerless while adults made decisions that would determine her future. "The recording is definitely admissible," said Agent Sarah Chin from the FBI's white-collar crime division. "But we'll need corroborating evidence to build a strong case. Mr. Sterling is smart, he's covered his tracks well." Detective Rodriguez, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier, looked up from his laptop. "We've run a preliminary financial analysis. There are irregularities going back 18 months, but the pattern is sophisticated. Shell companies, offshore accounts, timing that coincides with major client payments. This isn't amateur hour." Simone felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had trusted Robert completely, giving him access to everything. He had been her first major hire when the company expanded, recommended by a mutual contact and presenting impressive credentials. She realized now that she had been so focused on growing the business that she had never questioned why such an experienced CFO would want to work for a small, black-owned tech company. "Ms. Davis," Agent Chin said, "we need you to think carefully. Has Mr. Sterling ever acted suspiciously? Unusual patterns, unexplained absences, conversations that seemed odd." Simone closed her eyes, forcing herself to relive the past year. There were late-night meetings I wasn't invited to. He said they were with potential investors, but he never provided details. And about 6 months ago, he suggested we switch to a new accounting firm. Said they offered better rates and more sophisticated services. What firm? Detective Rodriguez asked, his fingers already moving over his keyboard. Sterling Associates Financial, Simone said, then stopped. Sterling Associates. I never made the connection to his name. How could I have been so blind? Because you trusted someone you had no reason not to trust, Destiny said firmly. That's not blindness, that's being a decent human being. Don't let his betrayal make you question your instincts about people. Grace looked up from her father's lap. Miss Simone, are you sad because the bad man tricked you? The simple question from the 8-year-old cut straight to the heart of Simone's pain. She knelt down beside Grace's chair, meeting the child's eyes. Yes, honey. I am sad. I trusted someone who was lying to me, and now it's hurt people I care about. My teacher says that when people lie to us, it's because they're broken inside, not because we're bad at trusting, Grace said solemnly. Maybe the bad man was already broken when you met him. Out of the mouths of babes. Simone felt some of the self-recrimination ease. Grace was right. Robert's betrayal said everything about his character and nothing about her judgment. Agent Chen's phone buzzed. She answered, listened for a moment, then hung up with a grim expression. We have a problem. Sterling just transferred $2 million to an account in the Cayman Islands. He's liquidating assets fast. He's running, Destiny said. How long before we can freeze his accounts? Working on it, but international transfers are complicated. We might be looking at hours, maybe days. Leon spoke up for the first time since arriving in the security office. What about the building security cameras? If he's been moving files and meeting with people, there should be video evidence. Destiny nodded approvingly. Good thinking. I've already pulled 6 months of footage, but it's going to take time to review it all. Grace, Simone said suddenly, when you saw Mr. Sterling moving those boxes, do you remember what day it was? Grace scrunched up her face in concentration. It was after my school play. Daddy came to watch me be a tree in the forest, and then we came here so he could work. That was... She looked at her father. March 15th, Leon said. I remember because I had to switch shifts to attend the play. Destiny immediately began pulling up the security footage from that date. The screens filled with black and white images of the building's various floors and entrances. As she fast-forwarded through the night shift, they could see Leon methodically cleaning offices, completely unaware that he was documenting potential evidence. There, Grace said, pointing at one of the screens. That's when I saw them. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. On the screen, Robert Sterling and another man were indeed moving boxes from the accounting office to a service elevator. The unknown man was tall and heavy-set, wearing a baseball cap that obscured his face from the cameras. Can you enhance that image? Agent Chen asked. I can try, Destiny said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. But the angle isn't great, and the lighting in that hallway has always been poor. As they worked to clean up the image, Simone's phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert Sterling's name. She looked at Agent Chin, who nodded and gestured for her to answer while recording the call. Robert, Simone said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Simone, thank God. Listen, I'm at the office dealing with a security situation. It looks like someone broke in and accessed our financial systems. I've called the police, but I think we may have been robbed. The audacity of his lie was breathtaking. Simone looked around the room at the faces of the people who were risking their careers and safety to expose his crimes. Leon, who was holding his daughter tighter, Grace, who was watching her with those trusting eyes, Destiny, who had left a comfortable private security job to help build something meaningful, the federal agents and detectives who were working late into the night to pursue justice. That's terrible, Robert, Simone said. How much money was taken? It's hard to tell yet, but potentially millions. The thieves were sophisticated. They knew exactly where to look and how to cover their tracks. I'm working with our security team and the authorities to investigate. Simone felt rage building in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. I'll be right there to help. No. Robert's response was too quick, too panicked. I mean, it's not safe. The police want to process the scene first. I'll handle everything and update you in the morning. Of course, Simone said. I trust you completely, Robert. You've always taken such good care of the company's interests. After she hung up, Agent Chin smiled grimly. Beautiful. He just dug his own grave. That call establishes clear intent to defraud and provides evidence of ongoing criminal activity. What happens now? Leon asked. Now we gather enough evidence to put him away for a very long time, Detective Rodriguez said. Mr. Thompson, your daughter may have just helped us crack the biggest corporate embezzlement case this city has seen in years. Grace looked around the room with wide eyes. Does that mean the bad man can't hurt my daddy anymore? It means we're going to make sure he can never hurt anyone again, Simone promised. But even as she spoke, Simone knew they were far from safe. Robert Sterling was desperate, cornered, and still had access to resources and connections. Men like him didn't go down without a fight, and they rarely fought fair. The next few hours would determine whether a little girl's courage and a mother's determination to protect her company family would be enough to overcome years of calculated corruption. Outside the basement windows, dawn was still hours away, but Simone could feel something shifting. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, the possibility of real justice. For Grace, for Leon, for every honest employee who had trusted her to build something worthy of their faith. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time all night, Simone felt like they might actually win. By 3 a.m, the security office had become a hive of activity that would have impressed any FBI field office. Agent Chin had called in additional federal resources, Detective Rodriguez had coordinated with the district attorney's office, and Destiny had transformed the building's security system into a surveillance network that would have made the NSA proud. Grace had fallen asleep in her father's arms, exhausted by the night's events but still clutching the phone that had started everything. Leon watched over her with fierce protectiveness, his eyes never leaving the screens that showed Robert Sterling's continued movements throughout the building. He's getting desperate, Destiny observed, pointing to one monitor. Look at his body language. He's checking over his shoulder constantly, moving faster than normal. He knows something's wrong. Simone studied the feed from her office, where Robert was frantically packing files into boxes and loading them onto a cart. He's destroying evidence. How do we stop him without tipping our hand? We don't, Agent Chin said. Let him dig deeper. Every action he takes right now is being recorded and will be used against him. The more he panics, the more mistakes he makes. Patricia Hayes, Davis Tech's legal counsel, had arrived an hour earlier and was now working with federal prosecutors to ensure every piece of evidence would be admissible in court. Patricia was a woman who had climbed the legal ranks through sheer brilliance and determination, and her presence gave Simone confidence that they were building an airtight case. The financial forensics team will be here at dawn, Patricia reported. They'll need access to all company accounts, records, and systems. This is going to be a comprehensive investigation, Simone. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Absolutely, Simone said without hesitation. I want them to examine everything. If there are other irregularities, other people involved, I need to know. Detective Rodriguez looked up from his laptop with a grim expression. We may have found Sterling's partner. The man in the security footage, facial recognition got a partial match. Anthony Marcelli, known associate of several organized crime families. This isn't just embezzlement, folks. This is money laundering. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Leon instinctively tightened his hold on Grace, while Simone felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Organized crime meant connections, resources, and a willingness to eliminate threats that went far beyond corporate malfeasance. How did this happen to my company? Simone asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How did I let criminals infiltrate everything I've built? You didn't let anything happen, Destiny said firmly. You were targeted because you're successful, because you have a reputation for integrity, and because a black-owned business provides perfect cover for their operations. They needed legitimacy, and your company gave them that. Agent Chin nodded in agreement. This is their playbook. Find successful minority-owned businesses, place operatives in key positions, use the company's reputation to launder money while bleeding it dry. When they're done, they disappear and leave the business owner holding the bag. The cruel calculation of it made Simone sick. She had worked for 20 years to build something meaningful, to create opportunities for people who looked like her, to prove that excellence could come from anywhere. And criminals had seen her success as nothing more than a convenient tool for their schemes. Miss Simone? Grace's small voice cut through Simone's dark thoughts. The little girl had woken up and was watching her with those wise, caring eyes. Are you okay? Grace asked. You look like my daddy did when Mama was sick and we didn't have money for the doctor. The simple comparison, linking Simone's current crisis to the everyday struggles of working families, brought everything into focus. This wasn't about corporate pride or personal reputation. This was about justice, about protecting people like Leon and Grace from predators who saw them as disposable. I'm better now, honey, Simone said, kneeling beside Grace's chair. You reminded me of something important. This isn't about what they took from me. It's about what we're going to do to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. Grace nodded solemnly. Like superheroes? Exactly like superheroes. Sometimes regular people have to be brave to stop the bad guys. Ms. Davis, Agent Chin interrupted. We need to make a decision. Sterling is clearly preparing to run. We can arrest him now on what we have, but if we wait a few more hours, we might catch him in the act of additional crimes that would strengthen our case. Simone looked around the room at the faces of people who had risked everything to help her. Leon, who could have kept quiet and kept his family safe. Grace, who had shown courage beyond her years. Destiny, who had stepped into danger without hesitation. The federal agents and police officers who were working through the night to pursue justice. What's the risk if we wait? She asked. He could escape, Detective Rodriguez said. Or if he realizes how much evidence we have, he might decide to eliminate witnesses before he runs. Leon spoke up quietly. What would you want us to do if Grace was your daughter? The question cut straight to the heart of the decision. Simone thought about her own childhood, about her mother's warnings to stay away from trouble, to keep her head down, to not make waves. Those lessons had kept them safe, but they had also taught her that justice was a luxury that people like them couldn't afford. Tonight, in this room, surrounded by people who were risking everything for what was right, Simone realized that her mother's caution had been born of necessity, not truth. Justice wasn't a luxury, it was a responsibility. We wait, she decided. But not because I want to strengthen the case. We wait because Grace's recording gave us this opportunity, and we owe it to her to make sure it counts for everything it can. We're going to expose this entire network, not just Robert Sterling. Agent Chin nodded approvingly. Smart choice. But we're going to need more security around the Thompson family. If Marcelli's people realize what we know, they won't, Destiny said with quiet confidence. Because Grace and Leon are going to disappear into federal protection until this is over. And Robert Sterling is going to lead us straight to the rest of his organization. As if summoned by their conversation, Simone's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed an unknown number. Answer it, Agent Chin said, quickly setting up recording equipment. But be careful. This could be Marcelli. Simone's hands were steady as she accepted the call, but her heart was racing. Hello. Ms. Davis, my name is Anthony Marcelli. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The voice was cultured, calm, and absolutely terrifying in its casual menace. Simone looked at Grace, who was watching her with complete trust, and felt steel enter her spine. I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about, Simone said. Of course you do. A certain recording made by a certain little girl. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement to make this problem disappear. Everyone walks away happy, no one gets hurt. And if I'm not interested in your settlement? The pause was long and loaded with threat. Then we'll have to discuss alternative solutions. I'd hate for anything to happen to that beautiful building you've worked so hard to create. Or to the people who work there. Accidents happen so easily in the construction business. The call ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Simone realized her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with rage. These men had threatened her company, her employees, and now a child. They had picked the wrong woman to intimidate. Agent Chin, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade, how fast can you get federal marshals here? Because I'm about to do something that's going to make Anthony Marcelli very, very angry. Grace reached over and took Simone's hand. Are we going to stop the bad men now? Yes, honey, Simone said, squeezing the small hand that had started this all. We're going to stop them all. Dawn broke over the city like a promise of justice, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that streamed through the windows of Davis Tech Solutions. Simone stood in her office, looking out at the view she had worked 20 years to earn, knowing that everything was about to change forever. The building was now crawling with federal agents, financial forensics experts, and computer specialists who were methodically documenting every aspect of Robert Sterling's crimes. Grace and Leon had been moved to a safe house, but not before Grace had insisted on recording a video statement that Agent Chen called the most compelling witness testimony I've heard in 15 years. Patricia Hayes was coordinating with prosecutors to ensure the case would be bulletproof, while Destiny worked with federal marshals to secure the building and protect the employees who would arrive for work in a few hours. Everyone except Simone knew their role in the carefully orchestrated operation that was about to unfold. You don't have to do this, Agent Chin said for the fourth time. We have enough evidence to arrest Sterling and Marcelli. You don't need to put yourself at risk. Yes, I do, Simone replied, checking the nearly invisible recording device attached to her clothing. This isn't just about arrests. It's about sending a message that black-owned businesses aren't easy targets, that communities like Grace's aren't expendable, that criminals can't hide behind corporate respectability. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert Sterling, meeting with investor at 8 a.m. Need to discuss security situation. Simone smiled grimly. Robert was still playing his role, still believing he could manipulate his way out of the trap that was closing around him. He had no idea that his investor was actually an undercover federal agent, or that every word of their conversation would be recorded and used to dismantle his entire organization. At 7:45 a.m., employees began arriving for work. Simone watched through her office windows as her people, engineers, designers, support staff, the cafeteria workers, the security guards, went about their morning routines, unaware that their company had been under siege. These were the people she had really been fighting for all night. Not just Grace and Leon, but every person who depended on Davis Tech for their livelihood. Among the arriving employees was James Mitchell, a young black software engineer who had joined the company straight out of college. Simone had mentored him personally, seeing in his hunger and determination an echo of her own younger self. Watching him walk confidently through the lobby, she felt a fierce protectiveness that went beyond business interests. Target approaching. Destiny's voice came through Simone's earpiece. Sterling's in the elevator, heading to 20. Simone took a deep breath and walked to her conference room, where Agent Chin, posing as investor Marcus Thompson from Thompson Capital, was already seated with financial documents spread across the table. The irony of using Leon's last name for the cover identity wasn't lost on anyone involved. Robert Sterling entered the conference room at exactly 8 a.m., looking polished and confident despite the fact that he had been awake all night destroying evidence. He shook hands with the undercover agent and took a seat across from Simone, his demeanor suggesting complete control of the situation. Marcus, this is my CFO, Robert Sterling, Simone said, forcing warmth into her voice. Robert, Mr. Thompson is interested in making a significant investment in our expansion plans. Excellent, Robert said, opening his leather portfolio. Though I should mention that we discovered some irregularities in our financial systems last night. Nothing that affects our core operations, but we're conducting a thorough investigation. Agent Chin leaned forward with interest. What kind of irregularities? Potential unauthorized access to our accounts. We suspect industrial espionage, possibly from competitors trying to steal our client lists and pricing strategies. The good news is that our security measures prevented any actual theft. Simone marveled at the smoothness of his lies. Even knowing what she knew, she could almost believe his concerned executive performance. No wonder he had fooled her for so long. That's concerning, Agent Chin said. My investors take security very seriously. Perhaps you could walk me through your financial controls, show me how you prevent unauthorized access. Of course, Robert said, pulling out his laptop. Though I should mention that some of our more sensitive data is stored off-site for additional security. As Robert began his presentation, Simone's earpiece crackled with updates from the federal team positioned throughout the building. Marcelli's arriving, Destiny reported. 3 vehicles, multiple subjects. Moving to intercept. Copy that, Agent Chin responded subvocally. Sterling's accessing offshore accounts on his laptop. We're recording everything. Robert was deep into his fabricated explanation of security protocols when his phone rang. The caller ID made him frown. It was Anthony Marcelli, and receiving a call during a crucial investor meeting was the last thing he wanted. I'm sorry, but I need to take this, Robert said, stepping away from the table. Tony? This isn't a good time. I'm in a meeting with... Robert stopped, his face going pale as he listened to whatever Marcelli was saying. What do you mean, surrounded? I thought you said we had everything under control. Simone watched the moment when Robert realized his world was collapsing. His confident facade cracked, revealing the desperate criminal underneath. He looked at her with dawning suspicion, then at Agent Chin, who was no longer bothering to maintain his cover. Robert Sterling, Agent Chin said, standing and producing his badge, you're under arrest for embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy, and threatening federal witnesses. The conference room door opened, and 2 federal agents entered to place Robert in handcuffs. As they read him his rights, Robert stared at Simone with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You have no idea what you've done, he said. These people don't just steal money. They destroy everything you care about. Your employees, your company, your family, none of it will be safe. That's where you're wrong, Simone said, rising from her chair with dignity and strength that came from finally standing up to the fear that had controlled her for too long. My family isn't defined by blood or business relationships. It's defined by people who look out for each other, who protect each other, who stand up for what's right even when it's dangerous. Through the conference room windows, she could see federal agents leading Anthony Marcelli and 3 of his associates in handcuffs through the lobby. Employees had gathered to watch the scene, their faces showing confusion and concern. And my family, Simone continued, includes a brave little girl who recorded your confession when she could have stayed silent, a father who works 3 jobs to provide for that little girl, and every person in this building who trusted me to build something worthy of their faith. You picked the wrong people to threaten, Robert. We protect our own. As Robert was led away, Simone felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The fear, the self-doubt, the isolation that came with being a successful Black woman in a hostile business environment, it was all being replaced by something stronger and more sustaining. Destiny's voice came through her earpiece. Building is secure. All targets in custody. Financial Crimes Unit is reporting initial recovery of over $8 million. Copy that, Simone said. Time to address the company. She walked out of the conference room and toward the elevator that would take her to the main floor, where her employees, her family, were waiting for answers. It was time to tell them the truth about what had happened, about the courage of a little girl named Grace, and about the future they were going to build together. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment, Simone remembered standing in this same space just hours earlier, listening to Grace's whispered warning. That scared little girl had saved everything Simone cared about. Now it was time to honor that courage by building something even stronger from the ashes of Robert Sterling's betrayal. The elevator opened onto the main floor, where hundreds of faces looked to her for leadership, for truth, for hope. Simone stepped forward, ready to give them all 3. The main floor of Davis Tech Solutions had been transformed into an impromptu assembly area, with employees gathered around the central atrium where Simone typically addressed the company during monthly meetings. But this was unlike any gathering they had ever had before. Federal agents were still processing evidence, financial forensics experts were working at computers throughout the space, and the energy in the room crackled with tension and uncertainty. Simone stood at the center of it all, looking out at faces she had come to know and care about over the years. There was Maria Santos, a single mother of 3 who ran the customer service department with incredible efficiency and heart. There was David Kim, a brilliant engineer who had developed 2 of their most successful software platforms. There was Elder Johnson, the veteran security guard who had worked his way through night school and was about to start law school part-time. These people had trusted her to build something meaningful, and she had let criminals infiltrate their workplace. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on her shoulders as she prepared to explain what had happened. Family, she began, using the term she had adopted years earlier to describe the Davis Tech community. I need to tell you about something that happened here last night, and I need to tell you about a little girl whose courage saved our company. She told them about Grace Thompson, about Leon, about the recording that had exposed a criminal conspiracy designed to destroy everything they had built together. She explained how Robert Sterling had betrayed their trust, how Anthony Marcelli had threatened their safety, and how federal law enforcement had worked through the night to bring the criminals to justice. Some of you are probably wondering how I could have been so blind, Simone said, addressing the question she had been asking herself all night. How I could have trusted someone who was stealing from us, who was using our success to hide his crimes. The truth is, I trusted him because I wanted to believe that someone with his credentials would see value in what we were building. I let my desire for legitimacy override my instincts. Maria Santos raised her hand. Ms. Davis, what does this mean for our jobs? For the company? It was the question everyone was thinking but afraid to ask. Simone had prepared for this moment, working with Patricia Hayes and the federal prosecutors to understand the financial implications of the investigation. The FBI has already recovered $8 million from Sterling's offshore accounts, Simone announced. Early estimates suggest that represents about 60% of what was stolen. We're confident we'll recover the rest as the investigation continues. The company is financially stable, your jobs are secure, and we're going to come out of this stronger than before. The relief in the room was palpable, but Simone wasn't finished. But I don't want us to just survive this, she continued. I want us to transform it into something meaningful. Grace Thompson risked her safety to expose these criminals. Her father Leon has worked in this building for 3 years, keeping our spaces clean and safe, and most of us never even knew his name. That changes today. She gestured toward the entrance, where Leon and Grace were walking in, escorted by federal marshals who had brought them from the safe house for this moment. Grace looked tiny in the vast space, but she walked with the confidence of someone who had faced down monsters and won. "Leon Thompson," Simone announced, "I'm offering you a position as supervisor of building services, with full benefits, educational assistance, and a starting salary of $60,000. Your daughter Grace has been awarded a full college scholarship through the Davis Foundation, to be available whenever she's ready to use it." Leon stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide with disbelief. Grace tugged on his uniform shirt and whispered something in his ear. He knelt down to listen, then stood with tears in his eyes. "Ms. Davis," Leon said, his voice carrying across the quiet room, "Grace wants to know if this means the bad men can't hurt people anymore." "That's exactly what it means, honey," Simone said, addressing Grace directly. "And it means that when someone is brave enough to do the right thing, their community will stand behind them." The applause started slowly, with Elder Johnson clapping from his position near the security desk. It built steadily as the entire company joined in, recognizing not just Grace's courage, but Leon's dignity and Simone's leadership through an impossible crisis. David Kim stepped forward. "Ms. Davis, what can we do to make sure this never happens again?" "I'm glad you asked," Simone said. "Effective immediately, we're implementing new financial oversight protocols. Every major transaction will require approval from multiple departments. We're creating an employee ethics board with rotating membership from all levels of the company. And most importantly, we're establishing an anonymous reporting system so that anyone who sees something concerning can speak up without fear." Patricia Hayes, who had been standing at the edge of the gathering, moved closer. "There's something else you should all know. The federal investigation has revealed that Davis Tech wasn't the only target. Sterling and Marcelli were operating similar schemes at 6 other companies across the region. Grace's recording didn't just save this company, it's going to help bring down an entire criminal network." The implications of that revelation rippled through the crowd. Grace's simple act of courage had protected not just her father, not just Davis Tech, but dozens of other businesses and hundreds of other families. Agent Chin, who had been coordinating with his team throughout Simone's address, approached the group. "Miss Thompson," he said, addressing Grace formally, "the FBI director has asked me to present you with a civilian commendation for exceptional courage in the face of danger. Your actions have helped the federal government dismantle a significant organized crime operation." Grace looked around the room at all the adults watching her, then back at Agent Chin. "Does this mean other kids will be safe?" "Yes," Agent Chin said seriously. "Other kids will be safe because of what you did." Grace nodded solemnly, as if this was exactly the outcome she had been hoping for. Simone felt her heart swell with admiration for this little girl who had understood instinctively what many adults never learned, that protecting others was worth any personal risk. As the gathering began to disperse, employees returning to their work with renewed purpose and energy, Simone found herself standing with Leon and Grace in the quiet aftermath of the morning's revelations. "Mr. Thompson, Leon, I want you to know that the job offer isn't charity," Simone said. "It's recognition of your value to this community. You've been taking care of this place for 3 years, and now we want to make sure this place takes care of you." Leon wiped at his eyes, struggling to find words. "My wife always said that good people recognize other good people. She said if I kept working hard and treating people right, eventually the right people would notice. I just never imagined." "Daddy," Grace interrupted, "can I come visit you at work sometimes? I want to make sure everyone's safe." "Absolutely," Simone said before Leon could answer. "In fact, I think Davis Tech needs a security consultant who specializes in noticing things adults miss. Would you be interested in that job, Grace?" Grace considered this seriously. "Would I get a badge?" "The most important badge of all," Simone said. "The badge of someone who protects their community." As Leon and Grace prepared to leave, Leon to start his new position immediately, Grace to return to school with federal protection until the trials were complete, Simone reflected on how much had changed in less than 24 hours. A criminal conspiracy had been exposed, justice was being served, and a little girl's courage had reminded them all what it meant to stand up for what was right. But more than that, a community had come together in the face of danger and emerged stronger. The elevator doors that had opened this entire journey now closed behind Grace and Leon as they headed to their new life. Simone watched them go, knowing that their story was just beginning, and that Davis Tech Solutions would never be the same. For the first time since building her company, Simone felt like she wasn't just running a business, she was leading a family. And families, real families, protected each other no matter what. 3 weeks after Grace Thompson's courage had exposed the criminal conspiracy at Davis Tech Solutions, the company had transformed in ways that went far beyond new security protocols and financial oversight. The story had captured national attention, turning Grace into an unlikely symbol of childhood bravery and Simone into a voice for ethical business leadership. But it was the quiet, everyday changes that mattered most to Simone as she walked through the building on a Monday morning. Leon Thompson was training his new team of building services supervisors, implementing systems that ensured every worker was treated with dignity and respect. Grace had become a regular after-school visitor, doing homework in the employee break room and charming everyone with her serious questions about how to make the building safer. "Miss Simone," Grace called out as Simone passed the break room, "can you help me with my math homework? It's about percentages and Daddy says you're really good with numbers." Simone smiled and sat down beside Grace, who was surrounded by coloring books, homework sheets, and what appeared to be architectural drawings of the building. "What kind of percentages are we working on? If 96% of people tell the truth most of the time, but 4% of people lie a lot, how do you know which people to trust?" Grace asked, her 8-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of complex human nature. "That's a very advanced math problem," Simone said carefully. "What do you think the answer is?" Grace considered this seriously. "I think you watch how people treat other people when they think nobody important is looking. Like how they talk to kids, or people who clean things, or people who don't have a lot of money. The truth-telling people are nice to everyone. The lying people are only nice to people who can help them." Once again, Grace had distilled a complex concept into simple wisdom that most adults struggle to understand. Simone thought about Robert Sterling, who had been charming and respectful to her while dismissing the night janitor as invisible. The signs had been there, she just hadn't known how to read them. "That's exactly right," Simone said. "And that's why your daddy's job is so important. He sees how people really act when they think nobody's watching." Leon appeared in the doorway, wearing his new supervisor uniform and carrying a tablet that he was still getting used to. "Grace, baby, you're not bothering Ms. Davis with your homework, are you?" "She's never a bother," Simone said firmly. "In fact, she just solved a business problem I've been thinking about for weeks. Grace, how would you like to help me interview people for new jobs? I think your truth detection skills might be exactly what we need." Grace's eyes lit up. "Really? I could help pick good people?" "Absolutely. But first, let's finish your homework." As they worked through Grace's math problems, Destiny Thompson approached with a tablet and a serious expression. "Simone, we need to talk. We just got word from the FBI about the trial dates." Simone felt her stomach tighten. The federal prosecution of Robert Sterling, Anthony Marcelli, and their associates was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and Grace would be the star witness. Despite all the protection and preparation, the thought of putting an 8-year-old through the stress of testifying against dangerous criminals kept Simone awake at night. "What's the timeline?" she asked quietly, not wanting to worry Grace. "Opening statements start November 15th. Grace's testimony is scheduled for November 20th. The prosecutors are confident, but..." Destiny glanced at Grace, who was still focused on her homework. "Marcelli's lawyers are going to try to discredit her testimony. They're claiming she's too young to understand what she heard, that her father coached her, that the recording is unreliable." "Let them try," Leon said firmly. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes with Grace knows she's sharp as a tack and honest as the day is long. She'll tell the truth and the jury will see it." Grace looked up from her homework. "Are you talking about the court thing? When I have to tell the judge about the bad men?" Simone knelt down to Grace's level. "Yes, honey." "Are you nervous about it?" Grace considered this carefully. "A little bit. But my teacher says that when you tell the truth about something important, it helps protect other people. So I'm going to do it because maybe it will keep other kids' daddies safe." The simple nobility of her reasoning took Simone's breath away. This child, who could have stayed silent and avoided all the attention and stress, was prepared to face down criminals in federal court because she understood that her courage could protect others. "Grace," Simone said, "I want you to know that no matter what happens in court, you've already won. You saved your daddy, you saved our company, and you saved a lot of other people who don't even know your name. You're a hero." "Heroes are people in movies," Grace said matter-of-factly. "I'm just a regular kid who did what my mama taught me. If you see someone doing something wrong, you tell a grown-up who can help." Destiny and Leon exchanged glances, both of them recognizing the profound wisdom in Grace's words. Heroes weren't supernatural beings, they were regular people who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. Patricia Hayes entered the break room, carrying legal documents and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just received very good news. Simone, I just got off the phone with the federal prosecutors. Marcelli's organization is falling apart faster than they expected. 3 more associates have agreed to plea deals in exchange for testimony. What does that mean for Grace? Leon asked immediately. It means the case is so strong that Marcelli's lawyers are starting to talk about their own plea agreement, Patricia said. There's a possibility Grace might not have to testify at all. Grace looked up from her homework with genuine disappointment. But I practiced what I was going to say. I wanted to tell everyone about how my daddy works really hard and how the bad men shouldn't be allowed to scare people. You might still get that chance, Patricia assured her. But if you don't have to go to court, that means the bad men already know they can't win. Your recording was so powerful that just knowing about it made them give up. Really? Grace asked, her face brightening. So the truth was stronger than the lies? Much stronger, Simone confirmed. The truth is always stronger than lies, even when it doesn't seem like it at first. As the afternoon wore on, Simone found herself reflecting on the ripple effects of Grace's courage. The Financial Crimes Unit had recovered over $12 million from various schemes. 6 other companies had implemented new oversight procedures based on the Davis Tech model. Anthony Marcelli's organization had been dismantled, preventing countless future crimes. But perhaps most importantly, the story had inspired other people to speak up about wrongdoing they had witnessed. The FBI had received dozens of tips about corporate corruption, fraud, and organized crime activities from people who had been motivated by Grace's example. Leon appeared at Simone's office door as she was finishing her afternoon meetings. Miss Davis, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for my family. But I also wanted to ask, what can Grace and I do to help other families like ours? We've been blessed with so much, and we want to pay it forward. Simone smiled, not surprised that Leon's thoughts had turned to helping others. It was exactly the kind of character that had raised a daughter like Grace. Actually, she said, I've been thinking about that too. What would you say to helping me start a foundation? The Grace Thompson Foundation for Working Families. We could provide scholarships, emergency assistance, and advocacy for people who are being exploited or threatened by employers. Leon's eyes filled with tears. You'd name it after Grace? Grace's courage started all of this. It seems only fitting that her name should be associated with protecting other people. Daddy, Grace called from the break room where she had apparently been listening to their conversation. Can we help other kids whose daddies work hard? I know lots of kids at school whose parents are scared about money. Yes, baby girl, Leon said, his voice thick with emotion. We can help a lot of kids. As the day ended and employees began heading home to their families, Simone stood in her office looking out at the city lights, thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this point. A frightened little girl hiding in an elevator had become the catalyst for transformation that reached far beyond the walls of Davis Tech Solutions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to do the right thing, new chances to protect and serve the community they had built together. But tonight, Simone felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that Grace Thompson's courage had created something that would outlast them all. A legacy of standing up for truth, protecting the vulnerable, and never underestimating the power of a single person to change the world. The elevator doors that had started everything continued to open and close, carrying people up and down, but now they carried them to a place where justice had won, where truth had triumphed, and where a little girl's bravery had reminded everyone what it meant to be part of a real family. The federal courthouse in downtown was an imposing structure of marble and glass that had witnessed decades of legal battles. But few cases had attracted the level of public attention that surrounded United States versus Sterling, Marcelli, and Associates. News vans lined the street, reporters interviewed legal experts, and protesters carrying signs reading "Justice for Working Families" gathered on the courthouse steps. Inside a secure conference room, Grace Thompson sat with her parents, federal prosecutors, and victim advocates, preparing for what might be the most important day of her young life. At 8 years old, she would become one of the youngest witnesses in federal court history, and the weight of that responsibility seemed to rest easily on her small shoulders. Grace, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Martinez, we've talked about this before, but I want to make sure you understand. When you go into that courtroom, there will be a lot of people watching you. Some of them might try to make you nervous or confused. But all you have to do is tell the truth about what you saw and heard. Can you do that? Grace nodded solemnly. Mama always says the truth is like a flashlight in the dark. Even if people don't want to see it, it still shows what's really there. Simone, who had been granted permission to attend as both a victim and a character witness, watched Grace with admiration and concern. The past month had been difficult for the Thompson family. Media attention had forced them to move to a safer neighborhood, and Grace had needed additional security at school. But through it all, the little girl had maintained her clarity about why her testimony mattered. Leon adjusted his tie nervously. He was wearing a new suit that Simone had insisted on buying for him, and he looked every inch the dignified working father that he was. Grace, remember what we practiced. If you don't understand a question, it's okay to ask them to explain it. If you need a break, just tell the judge. And no matter what anyone says, you know you did the right thing. I know, Daddy, Grace said, then looked at Simone. Miss Simone, will you be in the courtroom? I want to see a friendly face when I'm talking. I'll be right there, Simone promised. And if you get scared, just look at me and remember that you're protecting other families who need someone brave to speak up for them. At that moment, Patricia Hayes entered the conference room with Agent Chen and Detective Rodriguez. Her expression was a mixture of triumph and concern that immediately caught everyone's attention. We have developments, Patricia announced. Marcelli's legal team has made a last-minute plea offer. He's willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a 25-year sentence and full cooperation in identifying other criminal enterprises he's been involved with. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Leon was the first to speak. What does that mean for Grace? Does she still have to testify? That's up to you, Agent Chen said. The plea deal is contingent on Marcelli providing information that leads to additional prosecutions. But Sterling is still fighting his charges, and Grace's testimony could ensure he gets the maximum sentence. I want to do it, Grace said quietly but firmly. Mr. Sterling said mean things about my daddy. He said we weren't important. I want the judge to know that we are important, and that what he did was wrong. Simone felt her heart swell with pride and heartbreak at the same time. Grace's motivation wasn't revenge or anger. It was a simple desire to affirm the dignity and worth of working families like her own. Are you sure, baby girl? Leon asked. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You've already done more than enough. I'm sure, Grace said. Besides, I practiced my speech and I don't want to waste all that practice. 20 minutes later, they were walking through the courthouse corridors toward the main courtroom. Grace held her father's hand on one side and Simone's on the other, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing architecture but her spirit undimmed by the weight of the moment. The courtroom was packed with reporters, FBI agents, victims from other companies that had been targeted by the criminal network, and members of the Davis Tech family who had come to support Grace. Elder Johnson sat in the front row wearing his dress uniform from his military service. Maria Santos had brought her 3 children, wanting them to see what courage looked like. David Kim had organized a group of employees to take the day off and attend the proceedings. Judge Helen Brooks, an African-American woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on fairness and no-nonsense courtroom management, called the court to order. As Grace was sworn in, her small hand on the large Bible, Simone noticed that even the court reporter seemed moved by the sight of such a young witness taking the oath to tell the truth. Good morning, Grace, said Prosecutor Martinez, approaching the witness stand with a gentle smile. I know this is a big courtroom with a lot of people in it. Are you feeling okay? Yes, ma'am, Grace replied clearly. I'm a little nervous, but my daddy says being nervous just means you care about doing a good job. That's very wise. Grace, I want you to tell the jury about the night you made a recording on your phone. Can you start by explaining why you were in the building where your daddy works? Grace took a deep breath and began her story, speaking clearly and without hesitation. She explained how she had been scared to stay home alone while her mother worked the night shift at the hospital, how she had hidden in the supply closet while her father cleaned offices, and how she had heard voices coming from the big office with all the windows. I knew they weren't supposed to be there that late, Grace said. Daddy always says the office people go home before dark, but these men were there really late and they were talking quiet like they were doing something secret. What did you do when you heard them talking? I got out my phone, the one Daddy fixed for me from old parts, and I started recording. Mama always says if you see something wrong, you should try to help if you can. And what did you hear them say? Grace's voice remained steady as she recounted the conversation she had overheard, including Robert Sterling's threats against her father and his casual discussion of making problems disappear. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity and credibility. When Sterling's defense attorney cross-examined Grace, attempting to confuse her about timelines and suggesting that she had misunderstood adult conversations, Grace responded with the kind of clarity that could only come from absolute honesty. Sir, Grace said when the lawyer suggested she might have imagined the threats. "I know what "make someone disappear" means. And I know what "accidents happen" means when someone says it in a scary voice. I'm 8, but I'm not stupid." The courtroom erupted in scattered applause before Judge Brooks restored order. But the damage to Sterling's defense was clear. Grace's testimony had been unshakable, and her authenticity was undeniable. When Grace stepped down from the witness stand, she walked directly to Simone, who wrapped her in a protective hug. "You did perfectly, honey," Simone whispered. "You told the truth, and now everyone knows how brave and smart you are." As they left the courthouse, Grace turned to look back at the imposing building. "Miss Simone, do you think Mr. Sterling understands now that families like mine matter?" "I think everyone in that courtroom understands that now," Simone said. "And more importantly, they understand that when good people like you speak up, justice wins." The trial would continue for several more days, but Grace's testimony had provided the emotional and evidentiary foundation for everything that followed. Robert Sterling was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Anthony Marcelli's cooperation led to the dismantling of a criminal network that had been operating across 12 states. But for Simone, the real victory was watching Grace walk out of that courthouse with her head held high, knowing that she had stood up for her family and her community when it mattered most. The little girl who had once hidden in an elevator had become a symbol of the power that comes from speaking truth to power, no matter how young or small you might be. 6 months after Grace Thompson's courthouse testimony had helped bring down one of the largest corporate crime rings in the region's history, the ripple effects of her courage continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted. The Grace Thompson Foundation for Working Families had opened its doors in a renovated building just 3 blocks from Davis Tech Solutions, and its impact was already being felt throughout the community. Simone stood in the foundation's main conference room, watching Grace carefully arrange folders for the day's first scholarship committee meeting. At 9 years old, Grace had insisted on being involved in selecting the recipients of the foundation's Educational Assistance Program, arguing that kids understood what other kids needed better than adults did. "Miss Simone," Grace said, looking up from her work, "can you help me understand something? This application is from a girl whose mama cleans offices just like my daddy did, but she wants to study to be a doctor. Is that really possible?" Simone smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams that had seemed impossibly distant from her family's circumstances. "Not only is it possible, Grace, but it's exactly why we started this foundation. What do you think we should do?" "I think we should give her the scholarship and then find her a mentor who's already a doctor," Grace said matter-of-factly. "That way she'll know it's real and she'll have someone to ask questions when things get hard." The simple wisdom of Grace's approach had become the foundation's guiding principle. It wasn't enough to provide financial assistance. They needed to create connections, mentorship opportunities, and support systems that would help working families build lasting success. Leon entered the conference room carrying a stack of applications and wearing the confident expression of someone who had found his calling. His role as the foundation's community outreach coordinator had revealed natural leadership abilities that had been hidden during his years of invisible work as a night janitor. "Grace, baby, we've got 23 new applications this week," Leon said, setting down the stack, "including one from a young man whose father is a security guard and who wants to study computer programming." "Like Mr. David at Miss Simone's company?" Grace asked, referring to David Kim, who had become one of the foundation's volunteer mentors. "Exactly like Mr. David," Leon confirmed. "And Mr. David has already volunteered to work with him if he gets the scholarship." Destiny Thompson knocked on the conference room door before entering with her usual purposeful stride. As head of security for both Davis Tech and the foundation, she had developed protocols that ensured the safety of scholarship recipients and their families, particularly those who might be vulnerable to retaliation from employers or others in positions of power. "Security briefing," Destiny announced. "We've received 3 more reports this week of workers who are afraid to report unsafe conditions or wage theft because they're worried about losing their jobs. The Foundation's anonymous hotline is becoming a real resource for people who need help but don't know where to turn." Simone felt a familiar sense of pride and responsibility. The Foundation had evolved beyond its original mission of providing scholarships to become a comprehensive support system for working families facing exploitation or intimidation. Grace's example had inspired others to speak up, creating a network of mutual protection and advocacy. "What kind of help do they need?" Grace asked, always focused on practical solutions. "Legal advice, mostly," Destiny replied. Workers who are being cheated out of wages or forced to work in dangerous conditions, or threatened when they try to join unions. Patricia's been handling a lot of these cases pro bono, but we're going to need more legal resources if this keeps growing. Patricia Hayes had indeed become the Foundation's de facto general counsel, using her expertise in employment law to help workers who couldn't afford legal representation. Her success rate was impressive, but the demand was overwhelming. Maybe we need to start a legal clinic, Grace suggested. Like the health clinic my mama goes to, but for people who need lawyers. Once again, Grace had cut straight to the heart of a complex problem with childlike clarity. Simone made a note to explore the possibility of expanding the Foundation's services to include legal aid. Agent Chin appeared in the doorway, still carrying the federal credentials that had made him a hero to Grace, but now wearing the relaxed expression of someone making a social visit rather than conducting official business. Are they teaching other kids how to record bad people? They're teaching agents how to recognize and protect brave witnesses like you, Agent Chin clarified. Your courage has made it safer for other people to come forward when they see wrongdoing. The meeting was interrupted by Maria Santos, who entered the conference room with her 3 children in tow. Maria had become one of the Foundation's most active volunteers, organizing community events and helping identify families who could benefit from the Foundation's services. Grace, Maria's youngest daughter, Sophia, called out, "Did you see the news? They're making a movie about you." Grace looked confused. A movie? Like with superheroes? Not superheroes, Sophia said excitedly. Real people. My teacher says they want to show other kids that regular people can do brave things. Simone had heard rumors about Hollywood interest in Grace's story, but she had been hoping to shield the family from that kind of attention. Grace was still a child, still developing her sense of self, and the last thing she needed was the pressure and distortion that came with media fame. Grace, Simone said carefully, how do you feel about people wanting to make a movie about what happened? Grace considered this seriously, as she did all important questions. Will it help other kids know that they should tell grown-ups when they see bad things happening? That would probably be the point, Simone said. Then I think it's okay, Grace decided. But I want to make sure they tell the story right. I don't want them to make it seem like I wasn't scared because I was really scared. I want other kids to know that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. The wisdom of her words hung in the air, reminding everyone in the room why Grace's story had resonated so deeply with people across the country. She hadn't been portrayed as a fearless hero, but as a real child who had faced a terrifying situation and chosen to protect others despite her fear. As the scholarship committee meeting began in earnest, Simone watched Grace carefully review each application, asking thoughtful questions about the applicant's goals and circumstances. The little girl who had once hidden in an elevator was now helping to shape the futures of dozens of other children from working families. But more than that, Grace had become a symbol of something that had been missing from discussions about courage and justice. The idea that ordinary people, even children, had the power to change their communities and their world. Her example was inspiring a new generation of young people to speak up, to get involved, to believe that their voices mattered. The seeds of change that Grace had planted with her simple act of courage were growing into something that would outlast all of them. A movement of working families supporting each other, protecting each other, and refusing to be invisible or powerless in the face of exploitation and intimidation. As the afternoon wound down and applications were sorted into piles for approval, Grace looked up at Simone with the serious expression that had become her trademark. "Miss Simone," she said, "do you think we're making a real difference? I mean, are we actually helping people, or are we just making ourselves feel better?" It was a question that cut to the heart of all philanthropic work, and Simone felt the weight of Grace's trust in her ability to provide an honest answer. "We're making a real difference," Simone said firmly. "But the most important difference isn't the money we give out or the problems we solve. It's the message we send, that working families matter, that children's voices should be heard, and that when people come together to support each other, they can overcome anything." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Because I want to keep helping people until I'm old like you." "I'm not that old," Simone protested with a laugh. "Old enough to be wise," Grace said diplomatically, causing everyone in the room to burst into laughter. As they prepared to leave for the day, Simone reflected on how much their lives had changed since that night in the elevator. Grace was still the same thoughtful, brave child she had always been, but now she was also a symbol of hope for thousands of families who had felt powerless and invisible. The Foundation's work was just beginning, but already it was clear that Grace Thompson's courage had created something lasting and meaningful, a legacy of standing up for truth, protecting the vulnerable and never underestimating the power of one person to change the world. 2 years had passed since Grace Thompson first whispered her warning in the elevator of Davis Tech Solutions, and the impact of that moment continued to reverberate through countless lives. The Grace Thompson Foundation for Working Families had become a model for community-based advocacy, providing scholarships to over 200 children, legal assistance to more than 1,000 families, and a voice for workers who had previously suffered in silence. On a crisp autumn morning, Simone stood in the Foundation's newest addition, a community center that offered after-school programs, job training, and meeting spaces for local organizations. The walls were lined with photos and stories of families who had been helped by the Foundation, but the centerpiece was a large portrait of Grace at age 8, holding the cracked phone that had started everything. Grace herself, now 10 and even more thoughtful than before, was leading a group of younger children through the center as part of the Foundation's peer mentorship program. She had grown taller and more confident, but her essential character remained unchanged, curious, brave, and deeply committed to helping others. "This is where my daddy learned to use computers for his new job," Grace was explaining to the group of wide-eyed 6- and 7-year-olds. "He says it's never too late to learn new things, especially if learning helps you take better care of your family." Leon had indeed transformed his own life through the Foundation's adult education programs. He was now working toward a degree in social work while managing the Foundation's community outreach efforts. His understanding of working-class struggles, combined with his natural empathy and newly developed professional skills, had made him one of the most effective advocates the Foundation had ever seen. "Grace," one of the younger children asked, "are you famous?" "My mama says you're famous for being brave." Grace considered this question with the same seriousness she brought to all complex issues. "I'm not famous like people on TV. But lots of people know my story because it shows that kids can make a difference when they see something wrong. Being known for helping people is different from being famous for being on TV." Simone smiled, listening to Grace's distinction between celebrity and significance. Despite the media attention, the movie deal that had eventually been signed, with strict protections for Grace's privacy and education, and the speaking invitations that came regularly, Grace had maintained her grounded perspective on her role in the world. Destiny approached with her usual efficient energy, carrying a tablet and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just received excellent news. "Simone, I wanted to update you on the congressional hearing next week. Grace's written testimony has been submitted, and the committee chair says they're expecting it to be the highlight of the entire proceeding." The House Subcommittee on Worker Protection had invited Grace to testify about the need for stronger whistleblower protections and corporate accountability measures. At 10, she would be the youngest person ever to address Congress on these issues, but her unique perspective as both a witness to corporate crime and an advocate for working families made her testimony crucial to the legislative debate. "Is Grace ready for Washington?" Simone asked. "More than ready," Destiny said. "She's been practicing her testimony, but honestly, I think she could speak extemporaneously for an hour and still be the most compelling witness they'll hear." Patricia Hayes joined their conversation, carrying legal documents and wearing the expression of someone who had just won a significant victory. "Speaking of testimony, I have news about the Johnson case. Remember the family that came to us 6 months ago because the father was being threatened for reporting safety violations at the chemical plant?" Simone nodded. The Johnson case had been one of the Foundation's most challenging, involving a large corporation with extensive legal resources and a history of retaliating against workers who spoke up about dangerous conditions. The company just agreed to a settlement that includes full back pay, medical coverage, and a guarantee that Mr. Johnson can return to work without retaliation, Patricia announced. But more importantly, they're implementing new safety protocols and establishing an independent oversight board. Grace's model of speaking up despite fear has literally changed the way this company operates. The ripple effects continue to spread in ways both large and small. Universities were studying the Foundation's community-based approach to social justice. Other cities were replicating their legal clinic model. Congressional representatives were citing Grace's story in debates about corporate accountability and worker protection. But for Simone, the most meaningful changes were the personal ones. The families who no longer lived in fear, the children who had learned that their voices mattered, the workers who had found the courage to demand fair treatment and safe working conditions. Dr. Angela Williams, Grace's mother, arrived at the community center still wearing her hospital scrubs from the night shift. She had completed her nursing degree through the Foundation's adult education program and was now working as a charge nurse in the same hospital where she had once cleaned floors and served food in the cafeteria. "How's my baby girl doing?" Angela asked, watching Grace patiently answer questions from the younger children about courage and standing up for what's right. "Being Grace," Simone said warmly. "Teaching other kids that they have power to change their world." Angela smiled with the pride of a mother who had raised a child with both strength and compassion. "You know, people sometimes ask me if I'm worried about Grace getting a big head from all this attention. But watching her with these little ones, I can see she understands that her story isn't about her being special. It's about all of us being special when we choose to do right by each other." As the afternoon community program wound down, Grace joined the adults for what had become their weekly planning session. Despite her age, her insights often guided the Foundation's strategic decisions, and her questions frequently revealed blind spots that the adults had missed. "I've been thinking about the kids who are scared to speak up because they don't want to get their parents in trouble," Grace said, settling into her usual chair at the conference table. "What if we had a program where kids could talk to other kids who've been through scary situations? Sometimes it's easier to be brave when you know someone else like you has done it before." Leon looked at his daughter with amazement. "Baby girl, that's brilliant. A peer support network for children who witness wrongdoing. We could call it the Courage Circle," Grace continued, her ideas flowing freely. "And we could have meetings where kids learn about their rights and practice what to do if they see something bad happening." Simone made notes as Grace outlined her vision, struck once again by the child's ability to identify needs and develop solutions with stunning clarity. The Courage Circle program would become another cornerstone of the Foundation's work, eventually expanding to schools across the region. As the meeting concluded and families began heading home for dinner, Simone found herself alone with Grace in the community center's main room. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the photos and stories that covered the walls, a visual representation of the lives that had been touched by one child's courage. "Grace," Simone said, "do you ever regret that night in the elevator? Do you ever wish you had just stayed quiet and let the adults handle things?" Grace looked around the room at the evidence of all they had accomplished together, then back at Simone with the wise eyes that had first captured her attention 2 years earlier. "No," Grace said simply. "Because if I had stayed quiet, my daddy might have gotten hurt, and all these other people wouldn't have gotten help. Besides, Mama always says that when God gives you the chance to help people, you don't waste it by being scared. And are you still scared sometimes?" "All the time," Grace admitted. "Every time I have to speak to grown-ups about serious things, every time someone asks me to help with a new problem, every time I think about kids who are in situations like I was. But being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. It just means you have to choose brave even when it's hard." As they prepared to leave the community center, Grace stopped at the portrait of her 8-year-old self and studied it thoughtfully. "That little girl looks so scared," she observed. "She was scared," Simone agreed. "But she was also the bravest person I've ever met. I hope I'm still that brave when I'm all grown up," Grace said. Simone put her arm around Grace's shoulders, thinking about the 10-year-old who was about to address Congress, who was developing programs to help other children find their courage, who was growing up to be exactly the kind of leader the world needed. "Grace Thompson," Simone said firmly, "you're going to change the world. You already have." As they walked out of the community center together, past the photos of families whose lives had been transformed by one child's decision to speak truth to power, Simone reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. A frightened little girl hiding in an elevator had become a symbol of hope for countless families who had felt powerless and forgotten. But more than that, Grace had proven that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about choosing to do the right thing despite your fears. She had shown that age didn't determine the value of your voice, that circumstances didn't define your potential, and that one person's decision to stand up for others could create ripples of change that would last for generations. The elevator that had started their story continued to carry people up and down in the Davis Tech building, but now it carried them to a place where justice had triumphed, where truth had prevailed, and where a little girl's whispered warning had become a clarion call for courage that would echo for years to come. Grace Thompson's legacy wasn't just about exposing corporate crime or protecting working families. It was about proving that ordinary people, even children, had extraordinary power to change their world when they chose to use their voices for good. And that legacy would live on in every child who learned that their voice mattered, every worker who found the courage to speak up against injustice, and every community that chose to protect its most vulnerable members. The light that Grace had shone into the darkness of that elevator had become a beacon of hope that would guide others toward justice, courage, and the unshakable belief